Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world of powdered faces, towering hairstyles, and beauty ideals that were as strange as they were serious. You're going to walk the shadowy alleys of Joseon Dynasty, Korea under a sky so starless and ink black, it feels like velvet, and peek behind the paper walls of upper-class homes. And here's your reality check: he probably wouldn't survive a day under those beauty standards. And tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it over there? Forget tanning lotion or beach vacations. In Joseon, Korea, if your skin was so much as lightly sun-kissed, you were practically shouting, "I do manual labor." It was coded, calculated, and deeply confessional. And that obsession with white skin, it was the bedrock, which, in this society, was the opposite of chic. They didn't just avoid the sun, they waged war against it. Straw veils, wide hats, even parasols, made from rice paper, helped block those villainous UV rays. And indoors, they used powders made of finely ground rice, lead, or even crushed oyster shell. In a society where women weren't supposed to stand out, they spent hours perfecting a look that made them glow like phantoms in the dark. Some even painted their necks and hands to match, lest anyone catch a glimpse of their real skin tone. You imagine yourself as a young girl, maybe 7 years old, sitting cross-legged while your mother gently pats white paste onto your cheeks. A nobleman also stayed out of the sun, often wearing wide-brimmed hats and long sleeves. A woman's vanity box might include multiple types of white powder, several brushes, and a small bronze mirror so dim it barely showed a reflection. And maybe that was the point. You didn't need to see yourself too clearly. You just needed to look like someone else would look at you and see virtue, purity, a soul untouched. A tan, for them, signaled manual labor, and they were trying to look like philosophers, not farmers. That said, no one was dusting their cheeks with oyster powder or curling their lashes with fish bones. It feels cold. It smells slightly sour. You're told to avoid the sun. Your hair is brushed smooth, and your re-worn own tee run around outside like the neighbor boys do. It'll ruin your face. A pale face meant a quiet spirit, a smooth brow, a calm temperament. But of course, plenty of women wore the powder and hated the rules, and others, like entertainers, Gisang, took this aesthetic to theatrical extremes, with pale faces so polished they looked like masks under candlelight. Think of it like early Photoshop, but in real life and with rice glue. Yes, that same shimmer you find in a fancy oyster bar was once dabbed onto cheeks like a blush substitute. Except it didn't sparkle, it dulled the face, subdued it, made it quiet. Where women are quietly dabbing white powder onto their foreheads by candlelight, lead and mercury weren't just lurking in beauty creams. They were actively celebrated for their whitening effects. You watch one glance quickly into her bronze mirror, touch up her chin with a finger dipped in white paste. You blink, and she's gone. Only the ghost-white glow of her cheek remains. Of course, no one knew then that long-term use might cause skin lesions, hair loss, or, death. Still, people kept using them, layering the white paint until their faces glowed like ghost lanterns. The room smells faintly of rice paste, pine smoke, and something floral, maybe dried lotus or chrysanthemum. Either way, pale skin became a national aesthetic, even immortalized in poetry. Writers described beautiful women as having skin like snow or faces like white jade. Not warm marble. White jade. Their faces are already pale, but still more powder. More white, because in this world, looking like you've never seen the sun is the ultimate goal. If you were a peasant woman, you might still wear powder for festivals or weddings. But no one expected you to keep your face bleached daily. You had fields to work in, babies to carry, fish to gut. Your beauty routine was shorter, and less poisonous, but still white remained aspirational. Even in folk tales, the beautiful girl is always described as bright or fair, like the moon goddess Change. Being white-skinned wasn't just attractive, it suggested you were sheltered, refined, untouched by the outside world. It meant you stayed inside the home, quietly spinning silk or tending to flower arrangements, not tilling fields or carrying baskets of fish. You can practically hear the whisper of silk skirts as they rustle through a courtyard, always in the shade. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge slowly through the winding logic of the past, and you come to realize beauty in Joseon, Korea, wasn't casual. In a land ruled by Neo-Confucian ideals, virtue was everything, and the virtue most prized in a woman: modesty, purity, self-restraint. So, women went to great lengths to look unnaturally pale. But here's the kicker. Some of those powders contained heavy metals. Historians still argue whether this obsession began purely with Confucian ideals, or whether it also absorbed older shamanistic beliefs about moonlight and cleanliness, and there's a strange sort of irony in it. Meanwhile, among the lower classes, things were different, and so mothers began training their daughters early. Of course, men weren't entirely immune. Though they didn't wear makeup, high-ranking scholars, there's something meditative about how slow and exact it all was. But even with all this artifice, real beauty was seen as something that reflected the inside. You can almost hear the wooden floor creak under their embroidered slippers. You blink slowly, and now you're inside another quiet room. Low beams, paper windows, and a small copper tray of beauty tools rest nearby. The right pair could say, "I'm refined, composed, virtuous." Before you even opened your mouth, the ideal was thin, soft, and sloping just like the graceful bend of a willow branch. Straight brows were too bold, too masculine. Arched brows were for entertainers. But willow brows? Those whispered poetry and demure glances and everything Confucian society wanted in a woman. And if they arched too boldly or grew too thick, scandal, disgrace, or worse, someone might mistake you for a courtesan. You imagine being a teenage girl sneaking into a quiet hallway mirror, using a stolen brush to add just a tiny flare to the end of your brow. Scandalous, of course. Your mother would notice instantly and tell you to go scrub your face. Male aristocrats often plucked stray hairs and trimmed for neatness, though never anything dramatic. But a well-groomed face was a mark of self-discipline. In covet as eyebrow philosophy, a Confucian man might spend his morning reading the Analects, then pause to trim his brows in accordance with inner virtue. You know, as one does. Others warned that doing so on your birthday would curse you with loneliness. If you walked into a tea shop with your brows drawn too thick, women might avoid your gaze. If they sloped too suggestively, men might assume you were looking for attention. There was an unspoken language in eyebrow shape, arch, and length. It was code, written in soot and silence. Some even said that a woman with uneven brows would cause discord in her household. A lot of pressure for a few hairs above your eyelids. She wipes it off and redraws it. Again and again. After all, good brows weren't supposed to flirt. Farmers, fishermen, and street vendors didn't have the time or the tools for elaborate brow rituals. That a single graceful line could say more than a paragraph, and you feel yourself drifting a little, lulled by the image of a room full of sisters, all painting delicate shapes onto their foreheads before a festival. There's intimacy here, mothers touching daughters' faces with care, wives shaping each other's brows for festivals, even older sisters passing down tools and tiny secrets, all of it passed hand to hand, like sacred knowledge in soft whisper. Still, even among the working classes, the concept of good features lingered. A willow-like brow could bring good fortune in love, or even better chances for marriage. And if your brows happen to resemble caterpillars, well, there's always charcoal. They were supposed to float gently above your pale face, like poetic punctuation marks. You're not alone. There's a young woman here, sitting upright, her head tilted just slightly forward, thicker, more expressive. Their job was to be noticed, remembered, and admired. They mastered the art of illusion. Soft white faces, bold lips, and brows like brushstrokes, each one calibrated to convey elegance, tinged with just a whisper of danger. Her mother hovers behind her with a tiny blade, shaving the girl's eyebrows with focused, reverent care. You're watching a moment passed down for generations, and it's all about one thing. Eyebrows. Specifically, eyebrows shaped like willow leaves. In Joseon Korea, eyebrows weren't just facial features. They were moral declarations. This is why, from a very early age, girls had their brows shaped, plucked, or even trained to grow a certain way. Mothers shaved their daughters' brows while the hair was still fine, barely there, so the regrowth could be guided like little bonsai trees. And if the brows weren't cooperating, no problem, just draw them on. Charcoal, powdered ink, even crushed burnt wood mixed with animal fat was used to paint ideal brows right onto the forehead. It's like early kabuki, but with more soot and fewer influences. Of course, this wasn't one style fits all. Depending on your status or region, brow trends shifted slightly. Either way, eyebrows held power. A single misplaced line could make you seem improper, or worse, like you were trying to seduce someone. Some court ladies favored a double-tapered look, while others matched their brow length to the width of their face. Sounds intense. But when you've got hours a day for grooming, and absolutely no access to TikTok, you get creative. Historians still argue whether these brow trends originated from Confucian codes or older Korean animist beliefs, where facial features were thought to channel cosmic energy. And for that reason, unmarried women were often kept under strict brow discipline. But not everyone followed the script. Gisank professional female entertainers, educated in music, art, and the social sciences of charm-crafted brows with more personality. And what about men? Believe it or not, Joseon scholars took their brows seriously too. Of course, not everyone had the luxury of eyebrow perfection. You trudge mentally through the mirror rituals of a Joseon home and realize something else. And yes, there were superstitions. Some believed shaving eyebrows on the first day of the lunar month could bring wealth. But those brows, those gentle, dark wisps, became almost like a social password. There's something dreamy about the idea, though, that beauty could be so subtle, so quiet. One of them stops, looks into her mirror, and tilts her head. Perfection, after all, takes time. The morning sun filters through oiled paper windows, but no one inside seems interested in the light. You're sitting on the floor of a well-kept room in a noble household, watching a quiet procession unfold. Even makeup followed Confucian order, specifically the obangsek. Red, blue, yellow, white, and black. These weren't just hues, they were symbols of the universe. A little red dabbed on the cheeks, not in blended swirls, but in bright, deliberate dots. It wasn't subtle. It was statement makeup, like little lanterns glowing on otherwise quiet faces. Crushed soot or burned pine needles were mixed with animal fat to form a kind of inky paste. It feels warm, silky, a little strange. You're not trying to look young or flushed. Court ladies had one set of makeup styles, dictated by rank and season. Married women used different colors than single girls. Gisang had their own exaggerated versions of the 5-color phase: richer reds, sharper contrast, bolder lips. Their look said, "Notice me," while the court ladies said, "Respect me from afar." You're trying to look balanced. That's the thing. Makeup wasn't about seduction. The effect, mothers handed them down like treasure chests of cosmic wisdom. You've never used half the pigments before. You're nervous. You dip your brush into the wrong patoops. That's for funerals. Your aunt corrects you with a long sigh and a pat on the back. You try again. Red on the cheeks. Blue near the temple. Balance. Breathe. Repeat. The design of the box itself could reflect a family's social standing. A simple wooden kit for peasants. A mother-of-pearl inlaid masterpiece for aristocrats, and in each drawer a specific color kept in balance, because even your face had to respect the 5 elements. Unmistakable. Not in the dewy influencer way, but in a deeply intentional, almost sacred way. Like you were less a person and more a painting walking through a Confucian dreams. It was about harmony, serenity, and signaling your place in a world governed by strict social rules and even stricter color schemes. Not great for sensitive skin. But hey, it made your gaze more compelling, or possibly terrifying, depending on how steady your hand was. You'd still see women bending the rules, adding a bit more red for excitement, swapping yellow for green because it matched a hanbok sash. Little rebellions, quiet ones, hidden in color. Weddings, harvest festivals, even funerals sometimes featured symbolic makeup. A woman might add red to honor life, or blue to invite peace, or yellow to ground herself in hope. And because makeup wasn't mass-produced, every pot of color was handmade, ground, steeped, and mixed at home. Beauty didn't come in compacts. It came in rituals. Lips got their own treatment. A gradient of red in the center, sometimes made from safflower petals or cinnabar, tapering out to paleness at the corners. You picture a woman sitting in front of her tiny mirror, grinding red safflower petals into a paste with a miniature stone mortar. It takes time. It takes care. She's not rushing. She's aligning herself with the world, one cheek dab at a time. The look was striking, otherworldly, like a porcelain doll who's been kissed by symbolism. Red for the south and fire, blue for the east and wood, yellow for the center and earth, white for the west and metal, black for the north and water. A young woman kneels beside a small lacquered box. Inside it, there was no fragrance industry back then, no lavender-scented setting spray. If your face didn't reek of crushed minerals or fermented rice, you were probably doing it wrong. Little pots of red, blue, yellow, white, and black powder. She isn't preparing for a festival. This is her everyday ritual. You've stumbled into the world of 5-color face painting, and it's more than decoration, it's philosophy. In Joseon, Korea, beauty wasn't chaotic or freeform. It was systematic. And yes, this cosmic color chart somehow ended up on people's faces. The ritual usually started with white because, of course it did. We're talking layers of pale base made from crushed rice or oyster shell, patted on to mute the skin's natural tone. Think of it as a blank canvas or a snowfield. If you're feeling poetic, then came the color. Historians still argue whether this aesthetic developed organically from Korean shamanism or whether it was a top-down Confucian import from China. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Either way, by the late Joseon period, the 5-color palette had become canon. People weren't just painting their faces to look pretty, they were balancing the elemental forces of the universe right there on their cheekbones. And don't forget black. It often showed up in the form of eyeliner or eyebrow tint. As you may remember from all that willow leaf brow shaping, you imagine yourself now at a dressing mirror, carefully dabbing red onto the apples of your cheeks. And speaking of ruses, of course there were laws about who could wear what, but even peasant women got in on the color game, especially for special events. There's something soothing about it, too. The texture of the makeup was thick and sometimes gritty. It smelled faintly of plants, ash, and vinegar. And yet, and here's a quirky twist, makeup boxes were often gifted as wedding presents. Now imagine being a young bride, lifting the lid on your first makeup box. And yet, despite all this structure, because even in the most orderly worlds, people still want to feel beautiful. The air in the room is humid and thick, tinged with the scent of cooked rice, fermented herbs, and something that smells faintly of lard. You're kneeling beside a woman's vanity box now. Not a fancy one from the court, but a lovingly worn, everyday kind. Inside are tiny porcelain jars with cracked edges, their contents unlabeled and mysterious. A dab here, a smear there. This was the original car beauty routine. And tonight, you're learning just how strange and sticky it could get. People walked around looking like glazed dumplings, and no one complained. First up, rice water. It might sound familiar, because yes, this beauty hack is still trending on YouTube centuries later. Ground into a fine powder and mixed with water, it became a gentle cleanser that lifted oil and even treated mild acne. Not as a face cream exactly, but as part of certain herbal remedies believed to improve skin texture. Burnt deer antler, powdered pearl, and dried centipede occasionally found their way into more advanced regimens. These were expensive, exotic, and hard to get, but highly prized for their supposed anti-aging effects. Did they work? Who knows? But you definitely feel glamorous. Knowing your cheek cream included ground-up luxury, and yes, if you're reimagining someone carefully collecting goo from a garden snail and dabbing it onto her cheek, you wouldn't be wrong. Nature had answers. Sticky, fragrant, and dangerously tempting, honey was used in small amounts as a skin softening agent. They'd tweak formulas, add secret ingredients, and pass recipes through whispered gossip. Add a splash of bean vinegar, one might say. Grind the lotus root finer, another would whisper. It was like kitchen witchcraft, but prettier. A woman might mix it with crushed ginseng or green tea leaves for a nighttime mask, hoping to wake up looking a little more divine. Sometimes the honey mask attracted aunts. Day 4. Face brightened slightly, pores still visible. Her hands are steady, but her eyes are tired. This isn't a moment of indulgence, it's a ritual of hope. A little routine to hold the world together. They weren't just chasing beauty, they were documenting it like scientists. Or skincare bloggers, for centuries early. Sometimes it just glued your face to your pillow. Either way, beauty has its costs. Some of them just had antennae. There's no bathroom mirror, no 12-step routine, just bowls, brushes, and instinct. It had a cool, silky feel and left your skin smooth. Kind of like a powdered miracle if your miracle happened to smell like crushed legumes. It was part of a woman's duty to care for her health and appearance, especially if she was married. A well-groomed wife showed respect for her husband, her in-laws, and the Confucian system itself. So a cracked heel or chapped lip wasn't just uncomfortable, it was borderline rebellious. Joseon women swore by the leftover water from washing rice. For moisture, women often turned to rendered animal fatuous lard. Others soaked their feet in vinegar to draw out heat and balance, inner harmony, because apparently, if your feet were beautiful, your dreams would be to, especially pig or duck fat, carefully purified and stored in little ceramic pots. And not just for noble women, peasants, merchants, and gisang alike mixed their own potions. often combining folk remedies with whatever ingredients they could find. Slathering that onto your face at bedtime may sound horrifying, but in a world without hyaluronic acid or ceramide creams, fat was gold. It locked in moisture, kept skin soft, and doubled as a base for other treatments. Add a bit of ground mung bean or barley powder, and voila, an exfoliating, greasy, slightly alarming face mask. After cooking, the milky runoff was cooled and used as a face rinse. It wasn't just about hydration, it was believed to brighten the skin, even tone, and leave behind a porcelain finish. And guess what? Modern dermatology kind of agrees. It's packed with nutrients and But in the Joseon world, it was less about science and more about devotion. If you were serious about your skin, you saved every drop. But rice water was just the beginning. You wrinkle your nose at the thought. But honestly, it worked. Historians still argue whether these homemade concoctions were passed down from Chinese medicinal texts or developed through indigenous Korean herbal traditions. Either way, they were serious business. Take mung bean paste, for example, and if your skin still didn't glow like freshly steamed rice, there was always snail slime. Of course, some ingredients bordered on the extreme. Then there was honey. You drift through these routines like a curious ghost, watching women rinse, stir, and smear in near silence. And not everything was for the face. Some women used herbal scrubs to lighten their arms and hands, especially in summer. The strangest thing, all of this wasn't even considered vanity, but women found clever ways to rebel anyway. And then there were beauty recipes written in diaries. Some noble women kept meticulous logs of what they applied each day, and how it worked. You sit there now, watching one young woman mash boiled barley into a fine paste. She hums to herself as she works. She smooths the paste across her face and lies back, still humming. Outside, a breeze rustles the pine trees. Inside, her face shines like the moon. It's late evening now. The cicadas are quiet. The air is thick with the scent of warm pine. And inside a flickering candlelit room, you're about to witness something both subtle and strange. A young bride kneels before a low table. Head bowed as an older woman, her new mother-in-law, maybe leans over and tattoos a small black dot onto her skin. And for women, one of the strangest and most whispered about trends was the placement of small, discreet tattoos meant to guard their virtue. You heard that right, ink, as a form of chastity charm. Not on her wrist, not on her back, no. This mark goes somewhere more symbolic, just above the edge of her foot. Soot or charcoal was mixed with a natural binding agent, pine sap or plant oil, and pricked into the skin using fine metal or bone needles. There was no anesthesia, no sterile clinic, just breath held, eyes closed, and a quiet understanding that this was part of growing up. It all ties back to Confucianism's obsession with control. A cherry blossom behind the ear, a small crane near the shoulder blade. It's not hidden, it's not shameful, it's art. And in that sense, it became a form of rebellion. While noble women were encouraged to ink reminders of silence, Gisang wore their marks like whispered secrets meant to be discovered. Their marks weren't for modesty, they were for mystique, for storytelling, for visibility of the body, the self, the family, and society. A physical reminder that your body belonged not to you, but to your family, your husband, your role, a permanent symbol etched into your flesh that whispered, "Stay in line," a small act of resistance, hidden under silken duty. Be good. Do not shame us. You'll remember that even the smallest dot of ink tucked out of sight can speak volumes. A woman's physical presence was expected to be subdued, silent, respectable, or let it fade and never reapplied it. A few even changed the symbols subtly enough to avoid detection. And sometimes, if you looked closely enough, about quiet rebellion. One woman, legend says, turned the character for virtue into a flower, then told her in-laws it had blurred by accident. In rare but real examples, some couples inked tiny symbols together, simple dots or calligraphy characters, often hidden near the wrist or ribcage. These were risky, forbidden, possibly even punishable if discovered. But they happened anyway, because when your life is confined by strict codes, even a single dot of ink can feel like freedom. So if that meant tattooing a symbol of restraint onto her literal body, well, that's what was done. Or sometimes wait for it's just near the center of her forehead. And no, it's not for fashion, it's not even for fun. Think of it as spiritual armor. If something bad happened, say war or capture, the tattoo would act as proof of their moral stance, a kind of celestial receipt. It's for modesty. In Joseon, Korea, tattoos weren't always taboo. In fact, they carried deep cultural and moral meaning. Sometimes these marks were placed near the heart, other times on the lower abdomen or ankylosing, where hidden from view. Tattoos on criminals were common, branding them as thieves or deserters. This public marking was meant to humiliate, so the fact that women still quietly embraced symbolic tattooing, even knowing the connotations, tells you just how complex and deeply personal it all was. The belief was that they symbolized fidelity and purity, like spiritual seatbelts for the soul, and in certain circles, especially among conservative Confucian families, it was considered a way to lock in a woman's honor. Historians still argue whether these tattoos were widespread or merely practiced in fringe regions. Some were hidden beneath layers of hanbok and never discussed aloud, but every time a woman walked or moved or breathed deeply, she'd remember it was there. A mark for herself, a promise, or a burden, depending on how you see it. Some scholars say it was common among noble women. Others argue it was more of a folk ritual, passed down among rural families who blended Confucian ideas with older shamanistic beliefs. But wherever it came from, it was serious. It wasn't decoration, it was declaration. And you might think, what did they use? How did it work? Well, the process was simple but intense. What made it even more layered was that it wasn't always visible. Some marks faded with time, others were reapplied. You lean in, curious about how a tattoo, something so permanent and intimate, became tied to such abstract ideas. Of course, there was a gisang. Entertainers trained in the arts and conversation had their own tattoos, sometimes more decorative, often symbolic. You can picture one now. A gisan sitting by a mirror, her back exposed just enough to reveal a tiny inked flower at her nape. Then there's the case of love tattoo. And now you're thinking, but wait, didn't Joseon, Korea frown on tattoos in general? Yes and no. There's one more layer. Some women believed that tattooing certain characters like chastity or loyalty onto their skin would protect them in the afterlife. Others say these tattoos were more psychological than spiritual. But not every woman accepted this quietly. There were stories, rare, mostly oral, of young women who refused the mark, who washed off the ink. You smile at that, and maybe that's the heart of it. Beauty in Joseon wasn't always about attraction. Sometimes it was about obedience. Sometimes about power. So tonight, as you drift through these candlelit rooms and secret rituals, you wake slowly in a world where smiles on a pearly white, but ink black. Yes, you heard that right. Imagine leaning in to whisper something soft and charming and revealing a mouthful of teeth, the color of charcoal. In Joseon, Korea, this wasn't a dental disaster. It was the height of married elegance. The dye was made from iron filings, soaked in tea or vinegar, sometimes boiled down with bark or other organic matter. The resulting liquid, a metallic sour-smelling ink that permanently stained enamel black. You'd paint it on with a small brush, carefully, repeatedly. Over time, the shade deepened. Some say it looked like polished obsidian, others say it looked like decay. Either way, it was unmistakable. You're wrapped in layer upon layer of brilliantly colored hanbok, your hair pinned up in a formal chignon, sour, oddly earthy. Your eyes water. Someone fans your face. The practice had its quirks. Women had to reapply the dye every few days or weeks to maintain the color, especially if they ate a lot of acidic foods. Her hands move automatically. She doesn't flinch at the taste. She's done this hundreds of times. Her mother did it, her grandmother too, and smiled back not in judgment, but in recognition of duty, of sacrifice, of identity. It's eerie, yes, but also oddly noble, because beauty here was never just about attraction. It was about transformation. She smiles faintly in the mirror, but only with her lips. Some created elaborate tooth-staining kits, complete with tiny bowls, brushes, and storage jar. One noblewoman's journal from the 1800s describes her blackening her teeth before formal dinners, reapplying just in case the stew wore it off. You're told not to eat for a few hours so the dye can set. And just like that you're different. Your maiden smile is gone. Your lips might still be red, but behind them lies a new identity, one that won't sparkle. Somewhere between the rice wine toast and the tearful bowing to your new in-laws, you're handed a small black bowl. Inside, that fateful iron ink. In Joseon, Korea, black meant modest. The constant exposure to iron and vinegar could erode enamel, irritate gums, and, ironically, cause actual decay. Some women developed chronic mouth ulcers. Others likely suffered long-term dental damage. But in a world where looking the part was more important than being comfortable, those side effects were brushed aside. Literally. White meant watch your reputation. You take a breath, dip the brush, open your mouth. You're stepping into the shadowy tradition of tooth blackening, known locally as oyap or oha. For Joseon women especially, those of noble statuses, was less about vanity and more about virtue. Honestly, in a world where youth and fairness were celebrated, this was a deliberate step away from that ideal. It wasn't about enhancing beauty, it was about ending it, at least in the romantic sense. Tooth blackening was a curtain pulled shut on flirtation, a visual wall. Once married, a woman would often dye her teeth a glossy black as a public marker of maturity, loyalty, and separation from her maiden identity. Their smiles were weapons, invitations. Their whole existence revolved around evoking longing, intellect, and fleeting connection. To blacken their teeth would have been theatrical suicide, so they didn't. And because of this, white teeth became suggestive, less fresh, and more flirtatious. But resistance could spark whisper, and in a society obsessed with propriety, whispers could be dangerous. A woman with white teeth after marriage might be seen as vain, unserious, or worse. So most women complied. They dipped their brushes, stained their teeth, and learned to smile less openly. Think of it as an old-world version of a wedding ring, but inside your mouth. The process was equal parts ceremonial and disgusting. Historians still argue whether Joseon Korea adopted this trend independently or under cultural influence from Ming-era China or neighboring Japan. But by the 17th century, black teeth had become a recognizable marker of social respectability among upper-class married women. They showed you had crossed a threshold that you were no longer flirtatious, no longer available, and no longer expected to dazzle anyone with a bright smile. You smile, and your teeth vanish into shadow. That was the idea. Of course, not everyone loved it. Some women reportedly resisted the practice, especially in later Joseon periods. Now imagine your wedding day. It tastes metallic, there's something haunting about it. But and here's where things get complicated. Gazang didn't follow this custom. As public entertainers and trained artists, they kept their teeth white. That's the weird reversal. Of course, but let's be real, it wasn't good for you. You picture a young woman now, in her 20s, reapplying the black dye after washing her face, and then you think about the moments when someone might have seen those black teeth. It marked where a girl ended and a wife began. You step softly now into the boudoir of a Joseon noblewoman, and the first thing you notice isn't her hanbok, or even her expression, it's her hair. Towering, spiraling, heavy with pins, combs, and ornamental jade. This isn't a hairstyle, it's a monument. You stare upward and wonder how in the world her neck is holding up under all that weight. And the answer, not very well. Welcome to the world of Joseon Megahest, where the more elaborate the Ioyo, Mayori, or Kun Mayori, the higher your rank or your risk of injury. These weren't casual buns. These were architectural wonders made of real hair, wigs, wooden forms, and an alarming number of decorative sticks. For queens and high-ranking court women, hair was a crown-just one that had to be reassembled daily by multiple assistants using tools that resembled knitting needles. A typical court wig could weigh anywhere from 3 to 7 kilos. Some were reportedly even heavier. The larger and more complex the hairstyle, the more status it signaled. Peasant women usually kept their hair simple, parted in the middle, tied at the nape in a soft chignon, or worn in loose braids if unmarried. You might see a merchant's wife sporting a modest hair roll with hidden padding, or a gisang arriving with a glossy, high bun made to look effortless but reinforced with wire. These styles weren't just about looks, they were visual resumes. Most people never did it unless they were grieving a parent or joining a monastery. A shaved head could mark shame, illness, or religious devotion, so for most, hair was something you grew, nurtured, honored, polished their pins with care, and passed down heirloom accessories from mother to daughter. You picture a quiet moment between generations. One woman smoothing another's hairline with a bit of oil, gently pinning it into place, whispering that a steady hand makes all the difference. A personal timeline woven from root to tip. Married women wrapped their hair in specific loops. Unmarried women let their braids fall. Widows wore somber shapes. Sometimes it was in, and sometimes you had to lift your chin literally just to survive it. Even the direction of a part could whisper your life story. Their styles were practical, durable, and easy to redo with a few twists. It involved boiling dried soap breeze or mugwort into a slippery, lightly foaming liquid. The result left hair clean, sweet-smelling, and a bit sticky, perfect for shaping. Conditioner, try sesame oil, or egg yolk, if you had a few to spare, and while their hair lacked the grandeur of the court, it was often just as long. Carefully oiled with camellia or perilla seed oil to keep it smooth and shiny. And yes, that brings us to the infamous incident you won't find in every textbook. By the late Joseon period, women began favoring smaller buns and lighter accessories, perhaps out of relief, perhaps out of sheer practicality. Scholars note that imperial edicts were occasionally issued to limit wig size, citing cost, extravagance, and just public safety. There are actual royal records with phrases like, "Please make the wigs lighter, people are suffering." You don't see that in modern fashion memos. One court lady, heavily adorned for a royal ceremony, collapsed from the sheer weight of her wig. Not just a graceful feint, she fell forward and hit her head. Some stories say she died instantly. Others claim she merely lost consciousness and had to be carried out flat like a tipped-over doll. Historians still argue whether the story is myth, metaphor, or unfortunate truth, but either way, a message stuck. Beauty can be deadly. You imagine preparing for an event like that. You're seated for hours while attendants pin up your real hair into a base knot, wrap it with braids from other women. Yes, that was common, and then anchor the whole structure with a carved wooden headpiece. Then come the decorations. Coral hairpins, butterfly-shaped combs, dangling beads. Finally, everything is lacquered into place with natural gum or sticky oils. If you move too quickly, the top wobbles. If you bend your head wrong, your scalp screams. Still, you sit up straighter. This was a beauty language that required suffering, and the higher you went up the social ladder, the heavier it got. But wigs weren't for everyone. Even so, the desire for volume persisted. And what about hair care? Believe it or not, Joseon women had their own version of shampoo. Then there was the superstitious side. Cutting your hair was a serious act, almost like cutting off a piece of your soul. Of course, all this reverence didn't stop trends from evolving. But even scaled down, hair still mattered. Women kept wooden combs tied to their sashes, because really, when your head is carrying 3 kilos of symbolism, balance is everything. So tonight, as you watch these hairstyles rise like sculptures, remember, beauty in Joseon wasn't always about delight. You find yourself now in a small courtyard garden. Quiet, except for the trickle of water in a nearby basin and the soft click of a stone grinding against a shell. A girl, maybe 14, kneels by a flat slab, carefully grinding something into a paste. It's not makeup, not food, it's naked, iridescent layer from crushed oyster shells. It was a Confucian barometer. The paler your skin, the more virtuous you were assumed to be. Tanned skin meant you worked outdoors. Too rough, too vulgar. Pale skin, that meant you were refined. Indoors, educated, a woman of restraint and careful living. Soon, she smeared this shimmering white goo all over her face. Welcome to the glow-up. She's sitting cross-legged, extra sleeves even during hot summers just to avoid the sun. Women covered every inch of exposed skin with powders, scarves, and oils. Some even stayed indoors 4 days before formal events to avoid the risk of accidental tanning. Her hanbok glowing like a flower, her face porcelain smooth, her lips red like pomegranate skin. So on lunar feast nights, young women would sit quietly in the moonlight, letting it fall across their faces as a kind of metaphysical facial. A young woman sitting under a blooming cherry tree, face tilted up to the silver sky. Her mother has told her that if she remains still, if she clears her thoughts, the moon will smooth away her imperfections. And even though part of her knows it's superstition, she stays still. She listens to the breeze. She waits. Just moonbeams, an intention. No filters necessary. And you know what? She probably has a tiny headache, because the lead is already leaching into her system. But she looks radiant. And that's what matters. Here, the obsession wasn't just with fair skin, it was with luminous skin. Pale, yes, but also radiant. The kind of skin that seemed to reflect the moonlight, soft and nearly translucent. It wasn't just beauty, it was moral character made visible. Not only did they brighten the skin, they were said to increase circulation. Your face wasn't just your face. It was a mirror of your inner self. The pressure didn't always crush people. Some women found ways to interpret the glow ideal more naturally. Instead of thick white paste, they'd use crushed beans, flower extracts, or even the milky juice of dandelion stems to enhance their natural tone. They didn't want to look painted. They wanted to look ethereal, subtle, like they'd never broken a sweat in their life. A clean, glowing face meant you were emotionally stable, spiritually aligned, and socially appropriate. Pimples, a sign of internal imbalance. Blotchiness, possibly poor virtue or impure thoughts. Acne wasn't just a skincare issue, it was practically a philosophical flaw. Cool internal heat and restore cosmic balance. These weren't pampering spa days. They were intentional acts of alignment with beauty ideals, with moral codes, and with your mother-in-law's expectations. You might laugh, but in Joseon, Korea, complexion wasn't just a personal preference. If they had time before a holiday or festival, would borrow egg whites from the kitchen and mix them with powdered flour to create makeshift skin masks. A temporary luxury, sure, but one with deeply rooted meaning. Mixed with water, oil, or even egg whites, the shimmering paste made an early kind of foundation cream. Some point to early Chinese influences, others suggest it arose from Korea's own long-standing reverence for water and moon imagery. Whatever the case, by the Middle Joseon period, it was everywhere. When applied, it gave the skin a white, glowy cast, slightly chalky, slightly dewy, like a porcelain teacup under candlelight. And that's where the crushed oyster shells came in. Historians still argue whether this nacre trend started as a court beauty ritual or originated from folk remedies in fishing communities. And let's be clear, oyster shells weren't the only tool in the paleskin toolkit. There was lead powder. Yes, which sounds terrifying because it was. Mixed with vinegar or animal fat, it created an even more ghostly white effect. Some women used it sparingly, others caked it on until their faces looked mask-like. The danger: lead toxicity. But since science hadn't sent out the memo yet, many noble women continued the trend blissfully unaware. You picture one now, an aristocrat at a palace banquet. There's something both haunting and admirable in how much effort went into staying pale. Parasols made of silk, wide-brimmed hats. Then there were whitening masks made from rice powder and ginseng. And while noble women might have had the resources to maintain this lunar glow full-time, commoners weren't entirely girls in farming villages. Because in Joseon, Korea, and here is a quirky twist. Some believed that the light from the full moon could whiten the soul. You imagine one of those nights, now springtime, maybe? Because somewhere in all of this strange beauty, the masks, the crushed shells, and moonlight, there's always a quiet whisper. Be still, be soft, be worthy. And when the wind dies down and the night holds its breath, you swear you can see it, that impossible glow. You're walking now through a busy street in a Joseon-era market town. The smells are chaotic: sweet rice cakes, fermented soybean paste, sizzling meat skewers, and yet your eyes catch on something less edible. Rows and rows of glossy hairpins, laid out like jewels under the sun. A binyo seems simple, just a pin to secure a woman's hair in a bun. But in Joseon, Korea, it became an entire language. One carved piece of bone or polished horn could whisper your age, marital status, class, or even your mood if you played it right. Her hands don't tremble. She knows the symbolism of every feather carved into that hairpin. She doesn't need to speak. Her hair does it for her. Others bought simple brass ones from market stalls, then customized them with beads or wrapped string. It wasn't about wealth, it was about intention. A well-chosen pin, even if humble, could make you look composed. Put together, aside from symbolism, a binyo could serve ... other purposes. In some rural legends, women used their hairpins as self-defense weapons. A woman might inscribe a Buddhist mantra or her favorite Confucian quote on the back. Patience is virtue. A quiet mind brings peace. Or, if she was feeling cheeky, this bun is held together by spite and stubbornness. one twist, one jaband. Yes, that's exactly where the deadly hairpin trope in old Korean dramas comes from. Ritualistic, quietly defiant, even in grief, the royal court, ever the buzzkill. Not the fanciest one, not the just the one that feels right. She tucks her hair, slides the pin, checks the balance. Perfect. Too many women were turning their heads into jewelry displays, and it got out of hand. One official decree warned that overly flashy pins could disrupt social harmony and encourage vanity. You imagine women reading that with a raised brow, then immediately shopping for a bigger pin. Whether that ever happened in real life is up for debate. But the binyo had presence. You didn't mess with a woman whose hair was anchored in jade and steel, prepared to meet your in-laws and not disgrace your ancestors. Giving a binyo as a gift held layers of meaning. A mother passing one down to her daughter marked a rite of passage. A husband commissioning one for his wife on their anniversary showed affection. Maybe, depending on the price tag, even enemies, in some rare records, returned a woman's binyo as a sign of honor. You don't return someone's sock after a fight. But a hairpin? That's a statement. Think of it like a portable razor, and lodged in your scalp. Their binyo were often flamboyant, oversized, almost theatrical. Some glittered with red gemstones. Others featured filigree work so fine it looked like frost. Their goal wasn't subtle symbolism, it was visual seduction. But even there, each gizang's pin carried coded meaning. A certain shape could hint at her hometown. A particular flower might reference a poem or song. These women weren't just decorating, they were curating. Some are delicate, carved from wood. After all, with the elaborate hair structures women wore, something had to hold them in place. But over time, the pin became less a tool and more a badge, an emblem of femininity, subtle rebellion, and even love. Others shimmer with jade, coral, or enamel. Welcome to the surprisingly high-stakes world of binyo, the hairpin that could say everything about who you were, where you came from, and how much you were allowed to show off. At a glance, there were two main types: the wing-like pins used for ceremonial hair, and the dan binyo. A woman gives her binyo to her lover before he departs for war. The rules were strict. Unmarried women wore certain materials and shapes. Married women transitioned to heavier, often more ornate pins. And during court ceremonies, the binyo could stretch into miniature cranes, chrysanthemums, phoenixes, each chosen for symbolism. A phoenix for resilience, a lotus for purity, a butterfly for transformation. It's a token, a promise, and in some accounts, she retrieves it from his grave when he never returns. Not every story has a happy ending, but at least the hairpin got closure, often single-pronged, for daily wear. The materials used told the story. If your binyo was jade or silver, you were doing well. Gold, aristocracy; simple, hardwood or brass, commoner. And if it was made of white bone, you were in mourning. Historians still argue whether the binyo began as a purely decorative accessory or emerged first from necessity. Take this. In some romantic folk tales, in formal settings, you picture a woman in the palace, sliding an ornate phoenix binyo into her hair just before an audience with the queen. But even among commoners, creativity flourished. Some women carved their own binyo from peachwood or pine. Of course, not everyone followed the pin. Kissing, as always, walked a fine line between tradition and improvisation. Now, let's talk practicality. And it wasn't just about wearing them. What's especially fascinating is how personal binyo became. Some had initials or characters etched on the inner side, hidden messages, prayers, tiny wishes, and yes, the government eventually had to step in. Even funerals had rules. Mourners were expected to wear plain white binyo, carved from bone or wood. No decorations, no gemstones, just silence pinned in place. But even then, even in sorrow, the act of placing the pin, of twisting the hair and sliding in the symbol remained grounding. And as you watch a woman now, seated before a mirror lit by a single oil lamp, you see her choose her binyo carefully, because sometimes all it takes to hold your world together is one elegant, silent gesture lodged firmly in place. The sound of paper rustling draws you now into a new synquater, more delicate. A woman sits cross-legged on a floor mat, surrounded by sheets of finely made hanji paper, dyed soft pinks and pale greens. She folds, layers, and presses with nimble fingers, crafting something that isn't a letter or a scroll, but in late Joseon society, colored and crafted, hanji made from the inner bark of mulberry. Others included delicate noragalik paper charms hung from sashes, decorative folded fans tucked into waistbands, and even collar ornaments subtly scented with dried herbs. Some women went further, perfuming the paper with clove or sandalwood, so that when they walked, a faint fragrance trailed behind them. Some claim it emerged as a clever response to sumptuary laws regulations that limited how extravagantly commoners could dress. Young girls wore paper butterflies in their braids during spring festivals. Even children carried tiny paper ornaments pinned to their hanbok, a token of playfulness or to ward off bad luck. In some areas, paper flowers were placed in household shrines as offerings, then later pinned to a daughter's sash before she left for marriage. Paper had presents. Can't wear gold? Fold a gold-colored peony out of paper. Want a splash of coral? This love of temporary beauty echoed bigger Confucian values. Life is fleeting, but in the morning, someone will still be talking about it. It allowed women to play, to dream, to decorate without risking scandal or debt. It was light, it was bright, it was just enough. Beauty even more so. Sometimes it's in the fold. The moment, the knowing that it won't last done loving it anyway. So you wore something delicate, something soft, something that would last only for the time it took to be admired, remembered, and gently forgotten. Paper blush, her hair done up in simple coils, a bright paper hibiscus tucked just above her ear. It moves slightly with every breath of wind. This being Joseon, Korea, there were rules. During periods of mourning, he wrote somewhat bemused that the bride wore a headpiece made entirely of pink hanji roses, and though it looked utterly fragile, it drew more admiration than the bride's actual dowry. Colored paper accessories were banned. Neutral tones only, no butterflies, no shimmer. Everything had to reflect your grief. Even your paper flowers had to wilt. It's not expensive. It's not made to last. But it makes us stand out more than any gemstone ever could. In some regions, women would cut thin circles of pink dyed paper and lightly pat them on their cheek, sort of like a temporary blush sticker. It gave a rosy glow without using any plant-based pigments or powders. Easy to apply, easier to remove, and oddly modern. If you think about it, tint some mulberry pulp with beet juice and shape it into petals. It was rebellion with a pair of scissors, like a whisper you couldn't quite place, especially in the lower aristocratic and commoner classes where access to silk or gold embellishments was limited. Paper offered a creative and surprisingly charming alternative. Women made elaborate paper crowns to wear during riverside rituals. Paper ribbons were tied to swings and fans. In one part of the country, girls floated paper ornaments downstream as wishes. Hairpins with paper flags fluttered like tiny banners in the breeze. You couldn't keep them. You weren't supposed to. That was the beauty. It's a flower, a hairpiece, a petal-themed symbol of elegance. You've arrived at one of Joseon's most fragile and fleeting beauty practices, the world of paper accessories. That's why these pieces were usually worn for specific occasions. holidays, festivals, weddings, poetry gatherings. The paper was lovingly made, shaped by hand, and treated with natural oils or starches to make it a bit more durable. Still, no one expected them to last. That was the point. They were ephemeral beauty meant to be admired, then gone. Yes, actual paper, worn as part of one's outfit. You probably associate paper with books, notes, maybe paper fans. If you're feeling old, the most common paper adornments were flower-shaped headpieces, pinned into the hair alongside modest spinio or combs. And if you're imagining paper crumpling at the first sign of humidity, you're not wrong. Historians still argue whether this practice was originally born from economic limitation or an aesthetic preference. And it wasn't only women. One lesser-known fringe tradition. You imagine a woman at a village festival. And of course, but come the Dano Festivaler, midsummer celebration of purification and beauty color, returned in full force. And, yes, there's even a written record from a 19th century scholar who stumbled upon a village wedding. You picture that now. The bride stepping through her doorway, each paper petal trembling as she walks. It's gone by nightfall, because in a society that prized restraint, paper was freedom. So, tonight, as you watch another flower being folded by lamplight, you realize that beauty doesn't always come from permanence. You're now stepping into a quiet, fragrant room where incense smoke drifts lazily, like a lazy summer cloud. The scent is a soft blend of sandalwood, pine needles, and something green and herbal that makes your head feel a bit clearer. Women didn't just want to appear they wanted to smell virtuous, too. Women would burn it as incense during long grooming sessions, mix powdered sandalwood into face masks, or infuse it in their hair oils. The scent was believed to calm the mind, clear away negative energy, and attract good fortune. You can almost see a noblewoman inhaling deeply, feeling the tensions of the day slip away. So, alongside layers of crushed oyster shells and lead powder, herbal perfumes and powders were an essential part of any lady's grooming routine. To go along with the blackened teeth ritual, women often carried tiny jars of herbal tooth powder, made from charcoal, cinnamon bark, and fragrant roots. For example, during formal visits, women were expected to arrive with a subtle, pleasant aroma. Too strong a scent might imply coarseness or desperation. Too faint, you might be seen as indifferent or careless. They're mixed carefully, almost ritualistically, and the scents mingle to create a living perfume complex, subtle, layered. Some Confucian scholars criticized elaborate scents as indulgent or distracting, preferring that women keep their natural scent pure and unadorned. Others argued that fragrance was part of cultivating grace and self-respect. You wonder if the layered scents could hide the tension beneath her calm smile, the burden of tradition, the weight of expectation, and the whispered rebellions only she knows. You could say the battle of minimalism versus embellishment has ancient roots. The softest fragrance carries the loudest stories. Finding the perfect balance was a delicate art, much like mixing your face powders or positioning your hairpins. For her, this moment is both self-care and ceremonial, soft armor before stepping into the strict social world outside. This wasn't just about oral hygiene. It was a way to freshen breath before court events or family dinners. You'd dip a small stick into the powder, rub it across your teeth, then rinse with water or diluted vinegar. Minty, bitter, and just a bit medicinal. Not bad if you're used to it. In the center of the room is a low table covered with tiny bowls of powders, crushed leaves, and delicate petals. A woman sits cross-legged, stirring a small jar with a tiny wooden spoon, preparing a mysterious concoction, face powder infused with aromatic herbs. These pocket perfumes were thought to protect against evil spirits or bad luck, If a woman suddenly felt uneasy during a conversation, she might discreetly sniff her sachet, hoping the herbs would calm her nerves or chase away unwelcome attention. Either way, its presence was undeniable and its effect powerful. Pine needles, mint, and even chrysanthemum flowers were crushed and mixed into face powders to create layered scents that shifted as you moved. The idea wasn't just to smell good, it was to wear your virtue on your skin, subtle and alluring. While pale, flawless skin was the dream in Joseon Korea, looking and smelling fresh was just as important. The most prized fragrance ingredient, sandalwood, imported from faraway lands, it was rare and expensive. Its soft, woody aroma, a secret weapon in the pursuit of every breath you take carries a whisper of pine forest, a hint of distant temple incense. People might not see your elaborate hairpins or perfect complexion, but they'd feel you before you even spoke. Historians still argue whether the use of sandalwood in Joseon Korea was purely imported through Buddhist ritual practices, or if it was adopted more broadly by Confucian elite women for secular reasons. But sandalwood wasn't the only herb in the scent arsenal. Imagine applying a fine dusting of this powder under your chin, on your neck, and across your temples. Then there was the matter of tooth powder. Fragrance also played a role in social signaling. And then there's the quirky side. Some women carried tiny sachets of dried herbs like lavender or mugwort in their sleeves or tucked into their hair ornaments. You lean closer and notice the textures of these powders and herbs. Some are coarse, like ground bark. Others feel soft and silky. Of course, there were debates even then about the appropriateness of perfume and powder use. You imagine a young noblewoman pausing in her grooming, inhaling the delicate blend of sandalwood and pine before applying her makeup, and for a fleeting second, because sometimes you slip now into the smoky haze of a traditional Joseon tea house, where the sound of water boiling mingles with the gentle clinking of porcelain cups. A woman dips her fingers into a tiny jar of white clay powder, carefully dabbing it onto her hands and neck before smoothing it over her cheeks. It's called baexiao, literally white snow, and it was made from finely ground white clay mixed with herbal extracts. Then, using soft cotton cloth or silk pads, they'd apply it in thin, even layers, making sure not to cake the skin. Some 18th century booty manuals describe the powder in detail, while other records hint that rural women made their own versions using local white earth and flower petals. It was a balance between enhancement and subtlety, never overdone. Her fingers glide gently over her cheeks, applying baexial with quiet care, because baexial could sometimes dry the skin out. Overuse led to flaking or irritation. Women who relied too heavily on it risked looking dusty or pale in an unnatural way. Balancing the powder with oils was an art form, requiring careful observation and adjustment. While excessive focus on appearance was frowned upon, maintaining a clean and respectable face was considered part of a woman's duty to herself, her family, and society. The desire for a fair, smooth complexion was shared across classes, even if the methods differed. You could say baexial walked the line between vanity and virtue. Outside, the sounds of city life continue, but inside, there's a bubble of calm. The white color symbolized purity, and the powder formed a kind of barrier against malevolent eyes. They were quiet, daily affirmations of identity in a world that demanded control and restraint. In rural villages, it was indeed uncommon to find women applying a thin layer before bedtime as part of a larger protective ritual. The powder served multiple purposes. It helped absorb oils, soft skin texture, and, when combined with oils, gave the skin that luminous, matte finish prized by noble women. Some even believed it had healing properties for minor skin irritations. It's a subtle ritual that you might have missed. But in the world of Joseon beauty, it was a secret weapon for achieving that perfect porcelain complexion. This isn't just any powder. The process was delicate. Women would prepare the powder fresh each day, often combining it with extracts from chrysanthemum or lotus petals. The cool, soft texture on the skin was calming, an antidote to the hot summers and dry winters of Korea's Sosh climate. For many women, it was a small, daily luxury, a moment of peace amidst the strict rules of decorum. Historians still debate whether the use of baexial was a direct influence from Chinese beauty practices or a uniquely Korean adaptation, but the charm of baexial wasn't only in its appearance. It was also a tactile experience. You picture a woman sitting by a paper window as sunlight filters in softly. Yet, there was a quirky flip side to this delicate powder. Another odd twist. Some women believed that applying baexial at night could protect them from evil spirits. You smile at the thought. Even beauty products weren't purely about appearance. They were armor, shields against social pressure, supernatural fears, and the unpredictable tides of life. In some Confucian texts, there's a quiet acknowledgement of these rituals. Meanwhile, commoners had their own versions of white powders, often made from rice flour or ground bones, and these were prized for their affordability and accessibility. As you watch the woman finish her ritual, pressing a delicate silk handkerchief to her face, you realize that the beauty practices of Joseon were as much about care and self-respect as they were about appearance. And sometimes, those tiny rituals were the only spaces where a woman could reclaim a sense of herself. You lean back, imagining the delicate dust settling like snowfall, soft and gentle, hiding stories beneath its quiet shimmer. You're now stepping through a wooden doorway into the dim interior of a Joseon-era bathhouse. The air thick with steam and the scent of herbs. Women-est laughter echoes softly off tiled walls as you watch a group of ladies soak in large tubs filled with herbal infusions, ginger, mugwort, chrysanthemum each, chosen for its supposed skin and health benefits. It was nurtured with nature's gifts. The herbal baths were believed to open pores, improve circulation, and smooth wrinkles. For the lower classes, these infusions were more medicinal than cosmetic. Mugwort, in particular, was prized for its antibacterial properties, used to prevent skin infections or soothe irritations caused by insect bites. A peasant woman might not own a jade hairpin, but she could gather herbs and prepare a healing bath that connected her to centuries of tradition. Overbathing was frowned upon, especially in winter months when women were advised to limit their time in hot water. The perfect balance was elusive. But don't forget ginger to warm the blood. It's a sisterhood bonded not only by beauty standards, but by shared experience. They blend scientific observations with spiritual beliefs, recommending specific herbs for certain skin types or ailments. You get the sense that skincare wasn't just aesthetic, it was deeply connected to health and longevity. A noble woman might spend hours preparing for a festival or family gathering by bathing in these fragrant waters, followed by careful drying, powdering, and dressing rituals. You almost want to dip your fingers in, but the heat makes you recoil. Amid strict Confucian codes that often confined women's movements and interactions, the bathhouse was a rare space of relative freedom. Some preparing for marriage, others seeking relief from daily toil, all connected by the water's warmth and the herb's scent. It was a place to relax, to laugh, to share secrets, to be seen and unseen. After bathing, women would often wear bright red clothing or tie red ribbons into their hair, a bold splash of color meant to protect and celebrate. The contrast of pale, powdery skin against vibrant reds created a striking visual effect, emphasizing purity and vitality at the same time. Bathing wasn't just about cleanliness in Joseon, Korea. It was an important ritual tied to beauty, health, and even social standing. In this world, your skin wasn't just washed. Others argue that communal bathhouses made herbal bathing accessible even to commoners, serving as important social hubs for women to exchange news and beauty tips. And yet, the bathing ritual wasn't always about luxury. Historians still debate how widespread these bathing rituals were. Some suggest they were predominantly aristocratic practices, refined over generations. One quirky fact: during the Dano festival, it was customary for women to wash their hair and body with special herbal waters, thought to ward off evil spirits and bad luck. But here's the catch. Prolonged exposure to hot herbal baths sometimes led to skin dryness or fragility. You imagine a group of women chatting quietly by the bath, sharing recipes for herbal mixtures. Add a bit more chrysanthemum for softness, one advises. Interestingly, some early medical texts from the Joseon period include sections dedicated to beauty through bathing, and yet this delicate care carried a subtle rebellion. As you watch the steam rise and curl like silk ribbons in the air, you think about the many women who came here over the centuries, because sometimes the simplest rituals hold the deepest power. You're now wandering along a quiet, moonlit path where paper lanterns cast soft pools of amber light. The air is cool and fragrant with blossoming magnolia and pine. It was a trusted companion, a confidant, even a symbol of self-reflection in the most literal and metaphorical sense. She lifts her small mirror, catching a glimpse of her pale, powdered face framed by carefully styled hair. That slight imperfection gave the reflection a dreamlike quality, blurring harsh lines and smoothing flaws, a subtle beauty filter before Instagram existed. While court ladies certainly prized their ornate mirrors, some records suggest commoners fashioned simpler versions from polished tin or bronze scraps. For them, the mirror was both a luxury and a necessity essential for personal hygiene and presentation. To break a mirror was not only unlucky but a spiritual danger, risking loss of vitality or beauty. Because of this, mirrors were often wrapped carefully in silk cloth when not in use, and stored in special boxes. Sometimes, a suitor's gaze would be judged by how the woman caught his eye in the mirror's subtle dance of glances and gestures. It's a moment of calm, an intimate pause before stepping back into the strict social world. Whether true or not, the story underlines how deeply connected beauty and spiritual well-being were in Joseon culture. Having a finely crafted cosmetic mirror was a sign of refinement and wealth, but also an invitation to engage in the daily ritual of grooming, posture, adjustment, and quiet. Women in flowing hanbok stroll slowly, holding delicate fanchair, polished pieces of metal or glass, framed in intricately carved wood or ivory. Confucian scholars occasionally warned against excessive vanity and recommended modesty in all things, including mirror use. But, like many rules, the advice was often ignored in private. For her, this simple tool is more than metal and glass. It's a gateway to self-knowledge, confidence, and the delicate art of being seen on her own terms. This is the world of cosmetic mirrors, a surprisingly important but often overlooked element in Joseon beauty rituals. In a society obsessed with appearance, a mirror was more than a practical tool. You imagine a woman sitting by her window as the last rays of sun fade. Most mirrors in Joseon were made of polished bronze or other metals, with the reflective surface often slightly warped or softened compared to modern glass. Historians still argue how widely these mirrors were used outside the aristocracy. a quirky detail you won't find in every history book. Some cosmetic mirrors were decorated with auspicious phoenixes, cranes, or stylized clouds carved or painted on the back. These designs weren't just decoration. They were meant to bring good luck, ward off evil spirits, and remind the owner of virtues to uphold. And then there was the superstitious side. Some women believed that mirrors held a small piece of their soul. One folktale tells of a woman who hid her mirror during a storm to protect her reflection from being stolen by wandering spirits. Mirrors also played a role in courtship and matchmaking. Young women might carry compact mirrors to secret meetings or gatherings, using their reflection to adjust their appearance and confidence. Of course, the use of mirrors wasn't always straightforward. You can picture the woman in your mind's eye softly smiling, brushing a stray hair away, holding the mirror just right to catch the candlelight. As you step back into the night, the flickering lanterns reflect faintly on the path, reminding you that even the smallest objects can hold stories as deep and shimmering as a mirror's surface. You find yourself now in the back room of a quiet home just before dawn. Outside, roosters are beginning to stir. Inside, a woman moves slowly by lamplight, wrapping her hanbok with quiet precision. Her face is already powdered, her lips tinted, her hair arranged into a careful coil. She's holding a final item in her hands. A ribboned sachet, embroidered, filled with fragrant herbs, and tied with silk thread. She tucks it gently inside her sleeve. Not for show, not even for smell, but for what it means. You've arrived at the final layer of Joseon Butitha, symbolic, spiritual, and deeply ritualistic heart of it all. Every item worn or applied served multiple purposes. Aesthetic, social, protective, spiritual. It wasn't just putting on makeup, it was putting on meaning. These tiny sachets called hongnang were more than mere accessories. Alone, disgraced, and banned from court, she lived quietly on the outskirts of the capital. But each morning, she still prepared herself. Hair coiled, powder pressed, hanbok straightened, sachet tied. Why, she once wrote in a letter, to neglect one's face is to surrender one's self. One told through soft gestures, through scent, silence, and stillness. The kind you have to lean in close to hear. In other words, she wasn't maintaining beauty for others but for herself. A way to stay whole. They were infused with meaning, memory, and identity. Some were filled with dried herbs to ward off evil. Just let the images linger faintly like moonlight on silk, like the last hint of herbal powder left behind after a morning ritual. From painted teeth to paper flowers, from deadly wigs to oyster shell masks, these weren't just oddities or outdated rituals. They were survival. Just rest now, held by the knowledge that beauty, in all its strange, quiet forms, has always been more than a form of quiet power in a world where women's voices were often silenced, but their presence still had to shine. Others with perfumed petals for confidence. Some even held written prayers or charms, stitched between layers of cloth. It was quiet magic carried close to the skin. What's clear is that it became deeply integrated into everyday life. A mother might sew one for her daughter on her wedding day, adding fragments of cinnamon bark, mugwort, and clove, symbols of strength, purity, and warmth. She will see no crowd. She will make no speech. But she carries centuries of ritual in the way she walks. Let the details blur softly in your mind. The powdered faces, the lacquered wigs, the paper peonies tucked delicately into quiet hair. Every gesture, every scent, every folded flower was a whisper in a world that often demanded silence. And in that silence, the women of Joseon found ways to speak. Through texture, through shadow, through a single jade pin, or a sachet of crushed clove pressed to the skin. Let them all dissolve like incense, smoke curling upward and away, and the faintest trace of sandalwood trails behind her. As the sky turns pale with light, a widow might carry a sachet embroidered with cranes, for peace and protection. Even children wore them, small pouches tied to their sashes, the smells grounding them in the tangible love of their families. And that was the essence of Joseon beauty. Not flamboyant, not excess, but something gentler, measured, whispered. Historians still argue whether the sachet tradition came from Buddhist offerings or older shamanistic practices. A woman might wear no jewelry, but carry a crimson sachet tucked under her sleeve. You wouldn't see it, but you'd notice something her calm, her confidence, her steadiness. It was an invisible force, anchored in her choices. And when you think about it, that quiet layer in the way fragrance, color, texture, and symbolism all converged is what defined Joseon's approach to beauty. Even the colors chosen were coded. White for purity, red for vitality, indigo for protection. There is a particularly touching story from the late Joseon period of a noble woman who lost her family during a political purge. And that's the thread that runs through everything you've seen tonight. A single ribbon, a pinch of powder, a sprig of chrysanthemum tucked behind the ear. It's tempting to think of history as a place of noise battles, edicts, uprisings, but there's a different kind of history, too. So you sit with her now. This final woman in the quiet morning, as she smooths her skirt and steps outside into the waking day. And now, as your thoughts begin to slow and your breath eases into a gentler rhythm, let's drift away from the winding alleys and sun-dappled gardens of Joseon, Korea. You've walked a long path tonight through beauty, not just as decoration, but as language. It's okay now to let your own thoughts soften. No need to sort, or organize, or analyze. You're safe now, wrapped in quiet. The footsteps in wooden hallways are far behind. The lanterns have gone out. The paper windows no longer glow with candlelight. More than a reflection in a bronze mirror, more than a pin in a bun. It's the ritual that tells you, you are here, you are real, you are whole. Sleep now, you've seen enough for one night.